Afghanistan was only one, and I think a rather small one. The fact of the matter is, from 1979 to 1989, the Soviets engaged in a very brutal war against the Afghans, and this becomes very important to understand Afghanistan today. 1 to 2 million Afghans were killed. 5 to 10 million, roughly 1/3 of the population, fled and went to another country. And with them, as in these sort of situations, you saw what they call the brain drain, where the professionals, the people with education, moved to other countries, set up shop, and really did not have a strong desire to return because things were so unstable. And then when you start building a government today, those are the people you need, but they've already resettled into different areas. Roughly 1.2 million Afghans were disabled in that 10-year conflict, as well as tremendous damage to the limited infrastructure that was there, and the irrigation systems in particular were absolutely ruined. Let's keep in mind the United States' role in this. I think properly we supported the Mujahideen, who we used to call freedom fighters, in an effort to bleed the Soviet Union and give them a Vietnam of their own. We provided them training, equipment, and money. We were not alone in this. We were also assisted by the Pakistanis, by the Saudis, and a number of other Gulf states, all of which helped prop up this resistance movement to the Soviet Union, which had the unintended consequence of also propping up religious extremists within the areas, as they often proved to be some of the better fighters, and it also corresponded with funneling aid to the Pakistanis, who had a religious agenda under their president at the time, Zia, who funneled the aid to them as well. It is important to note that two of the significant insurgent leaders that we're fighting today, Siraj Haqqani and Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, were recipients of U.S. aid during their time as freedom fighters against the Soviet Union in the 1970s and in the 1980s. So in 1989, the Soviets called it quits, pulled out of Afghanistan, and again, contrary to what many is sort of a popular version of what happened, for 3 years, the leader who was left behind there, a man by the name of Mohammad Najibullah, remained in control of Afghanistan and still kept up a pretty decent fight, exerting control over Afghanistan. It wasn't until the Soviet Empire finally imploded, cut off aid to Najibullah, that he was deposed, and really the country fractured into a civil war as different Mujahideen leaders, different warlords fought to establish control over Afghanistan. Najibullah met a very particularly brutal end. He stayed in Kabul because he was not allowed to leave for 4 years. When the Taliban came in 1996, he was executed in a particularly brutal way and displayed in a Kabul city square. In this period from 1992 to 1996, warlordism prevailed, tremendous amounts of lawlessness. Forces started ripping apart Afghanistan at an even greater rate, and large pitched battles that inflicted a tremendous number of even more Afghan civilian casualties. From this lawlessness, this sort of morass of despair, emerged the Taliban, and a popular image they come across as this group that had some form of legitimate leadership, religious legitimacy, which is true. And what they were able to do is provide a degree of stability, but to represent them as being popular in Afghanistan would be completely untrue. They're a widely unpopular group, but they were able to maintain control over that area, and something they hadn't had. So there was at least a degree of control that was exerted by the Taliban. They effectively presided over a failed state, invited in terrorists such as Al-Qaeda to set up shop in there, and again, it was not exactly like it was a good time to be living in Afghanistan. It was still incredibly poor, still lots of violence, and you had the Taliban inflicting a fundamentalist code of religious laws that was wildly unpopular with the majority of the Afghans. So as we all know, the plots against the United States for 9/11 were hatched in Afghanistan by Al-Qaeda, who was given safe haven there. Attacks launched against the United States on the 11th of September. 2001. We invaded in October of 2001 and swept aside the Taliban within a matter of weeks, with a tremendous amount of support from the Afghan people who were there, and the Taliban received very little support. Most Afghans were actually glad to have that go away. It's important to note that as we prop up Afghanistan as being this impossible place, this area that it is impossible to govern, it is worthwhile to ask the question, why, if it is this ungovernable, warrior, militant area that's impossible to govern, why was there really no popular uprising against the United States presidents in 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, when we were there? The fact of the matter, there was hardly any resistance. I'll give you a few casualty statistics there to back us up. For the first 4 calendar years of our involvement in Afghanistan, a total of 38 months from 01 to 04, coalition forces experienced a total number of hostile deaths over this 38-month period as 85. So 85 deaths from hostile action in Afghanistan for a period of 38 months. Contrast that with the most violent month in the first year of our occupation of Iraq, which was November of 2003, where we had 94 Americans killed from hostile death. So it took 38 months within Afghanistan for us to equal 1 bad month in Iraq within our 6 months. So again, this popular image that there's this widespread revolt against American presence and they hate all foreigners, absolutely not borne out by the facts. Even today, with the increase in the fighting, with the increase in the U.S. number of troops, the total hostile death total in Afghanistan for all coalition troops sits at 2,331 as of yesterday. That's over an 8.5-year period, which still is roughly equivalent to the 3 worst years in Iraq. Now, I'm not minimizing casualties. Every one of those is an absolute tragedy to the soldier or the service member that it happens to the families who are devastated. I'm not minimizing that at all. And as many of you know, I'm sure some of these people who died in these conflicts are my close friends or soldiers who served with me. But I do think it's necessary to put in the context exactly the levels of violence that we've experienced for a number of years in Afghanistan, and to get past this thought that it was this massive popular uprising against the U.S. presence, because it simply was not like that. With the removal of the Taliban and the installation of the unit government, you saw one of the most significant repatriations in the history of the world. 4 million Afghans returned to Afghanistan, all tremendously optimistic and hopeful for what was going to happen to Afghanistan now that the Taliban had been moved out. The fact of the matter is in 2001, 2002, 2003, and these early years, and to a large degree today, and I'll bear this out, Afghans wanted the international community, and the United States in particular, to take the lead in establishing security and bringing development to their country, because they know they badly needed it, and they know no one else could do it, and they certainly couldn't be generated by Afghans at all. Keep in mind that today, Afghanistan is a country the size of Texas, with a population of 28 million, which is effectively the population of Utah and Texas combined. And this becomes somewhat particularly important as I talk about some of the other statistics coming up here. For the period of 2001 to 2009, our international effort there experienced a significant number of problems. And some of these problems re-emerged from the past or emerged as a result of our involvement in that country. And first off, Afghanistan is a difficult place to operate. There's just no doubt about it. The geography makes it very tough. There is very limited infrastructure, and comparing and contrasting Afghanistan and Iraq, it really is absolutely no comparison in terms of the infrastructure and levels of development. There's 30 years of war ravages throughout that area that had devastated huge swaths of it. In this period of instability, warlords and power brokers arose, all of whom had to be dealt with. They had strong regional bases of support, but not exactly a strong national sense. When we established as an international community the new government in Afghanistan in December of 2001, we held a meeting in Bonn, Germany, and what came out of that was the Bonn Accords, and they made the decision to make an exceptionally strong central government in Kabul, not pushing much power out to the provinces and to the local regional areas. The idea was to install a strong central government instead of a federalist sort of system. I think many people would view that as one of the fundamental flaws of the political restructuring of Afghanistan. Of course, this period has seen a huge increase in the level of corruption. This corruption has been driven by Afghans, but it's also been driven by some of the activities of the international community, the way we've chosen to distribute money, the way we've chosen power brokers. We've added to the problems of corruption as well. Everyone is well aware, I think, of the drug issues that have come up. It's a popular, again, misconception. The Taliban was mildly against drugs, but the fact of the matter is they turned a blind eye to a lot of it, and they gained a fair amount of money and resources from the drug trade. They largely let it transit, and they left a lot of the growers alone. And today, drugs fuel a large portion of the insurgency, as well as fueling corruption within the Afghan government. I think it's important to note that we have had, for a long period of time, an under-resourced U.S. and international community commitment, both in aid and in military forces in Afghanistan. And I'll cite you just a few numbers. By December 2003, 2 years after we had invaded, total U.S. forces in Afghanistan numbered 13,000. By way of comparison, 13,000 is about the size of the Los Angeles Police Department. Okay? If you keep in mind that if you have 13,000 soldiers, the ratio of combat troops to support troops is roughly 3 to 1, and I'm being generous on that. That means on any given day you really had about 3,000 to 4,000 combat troops who were out and establishing contact and security for the people of the area. It's about 28 million. So again, 3,000 or 4,000 trying to secure a population of 28 million. Now they had some coalition support, they had Afghan support as well, but you can see how difficult the task was. By May of 2006, as the situation continued to deteriorate in Afghanistan, the U.S. military presence had raised to 23,500, which is an increase to be sure, but still is equal about the size of the Los Angeles Police Department, the Chicago Police Department combined, again, for an area the size of Texas and a population of 20 million. When President Obama was inaugurated in 2009, the size of the U.S. commitment to Afghanistan was roughly 36,000 troops, and at that point, we roughly reached a force commitment at the same level as the size of the New York City Police Department. Okay. Now, 2 years later, February 2001, we're at about 100,000, right under 100,000, and since President Obama's taken place, you've seen an almost 300% increase in troop strength committed towards Afghanistan. And again, I think, my personal opinion, troop strength makes a big difference if you want to make a difference on the ground. It is safe to say that in this period from 2001 to 2009, there was a rather confused and befuddled military command structure between the United States and NATO. I think it's well documented. NATO operates under the name of the International Security Assistance Forces. Uneven commitments from NATO contributing nations. Presence of many of these troops coming forward with national caveats, which was this device that countries would use to convince their parliaments to support the effort in Afghanistan, would put severe restrictions on their troops, like they couldn't patrol at night, they couldn't be involved in combat activities, they couldn't do a number of different activities which severely degraded their effectiveness. All of that puts you in the situation that we've had now for that we're right now. It's all transitioned to where we are today. First up, just again about Afghanistan, about the size of Texas, population 28 million, about the size of Texas and Utah combined. When you break down the population of Afghanistan, you just get a number of different ethnic mixes. I'll break down the major ones. 42% of Afghanistan is made of Pashtuns, of whom you hear so much. They're not a majority. They're about 42%. Tajiks make up 27%. Hazaras, who are Shia in Afghanistan, make up about 9%. Uzbeks make up about another 9%. It is interesting to know when you look at that numbers, if you take the Tajiks and the Uzbeks, you get about 33% or a third of the population. It's widely recognized that they have very weak, if any, tribal structure that unites them. So again, to say that Afghanistan is a tribal society, I just don't think it bears up with the facts. Tribes influence the area, and tribes are a factor, but they're not the dominant factor within the area. It's also interesting to note that with Afghanistan's diverse population, with its compartmented geography, there's been no attempt at all for people to try to partition Afghanistan into different areas like there was talk about in Iraq. You'll remember that at one point there was a tripartite sort of agreement where you have the Kurds to the north, the Sunni in the middle, and the Shia to the south. No one's really credibly put forth a vision of Afghanistan that has that, because they're not really divided that way. And I think they largely view themselves as part of a greater Afghan nation, something that they belong to since at least 1747. The other thing with tribalism, and why I think that is largely not a valid construct of looking at Afghanistan, is you've got to understand that mass migrations, dislocations, and these wars have done much to disrupt the tribal structure that had existed 30, 40 years ago. It's important to note when looking at Afghanistan, 80% of their GDP comes from foreign aid right now, so they effectively are a form of a beggar state. There are some potentials for that to change around. There are precious mineral resources that are being found. There is the belief that there is oil underneath the ground, and that will be an important thing to watch and as we go forward in Afghanistan. And one of the most important things to keep an eye on is to make sure the process of bringing that forth and mining that doesn't become absolutely blown by corruption. The U.S. goals of Afghanistan. I think it's important for us to reflect on what the President has said the goals of our nation are in Afghanistan